everybody now understands why we need to understand data first, because data would essentially give you the insights. So I think it's critical for everybody to not just understand what data brings to the table, but also understand how to leverage that data and the insights to essentially make sure that your audiences get that entire plate um, to the entire scheme of things, right? I think pretty much, I've always said so that I happened to stumble in the PR and communication field by chance. There was not a high inclination towards this field, particularly because I came from an economics background. But I was always intrigued by, how the storytelling behind the scenes used to happen, how marketing from brand perspective used to happen, how the communications, and it basically reaches out to the audiences, right? So, and I've always been fascinated by stories, and you would have heard potentially every PR professional or a communication professional say that. But in my case, I would say it's 100% true, because that's what exactly sort of a fascinating point for me was. Nevertheless, I think it was right after my economic honors, as I mentioned, right? I happened to be inducted in a course which gave me a bit sort of understanding about how the overall umbrella of marketing and communications work. And through that, I think I endeavored into exploring more about PR and comms. And essentially, when I landed my first job, which was into political consulting, and that's when I again, sort of gained more skills about how to communicate well, how to understand your audience as well, and that's where the cycle actually began. So I think it's been a great journey so far. If you were to ask me, I think 8 years into the business, um, and fortunately, or I would say rather fortunately, I've spent more time on the agency side, and as well as now we're working with brands, drafting their narratives and video campaigns. But I think it's been a journey which has been fulfilled with enlightenment, a lot of knowledge, a lot of mentorship, and great insights. So going strong, and hopefully we'll go stronger in the future as well. Interestingly, I think as I progressed, because I mentioned briefly about my political, campaigns and how I ventured into that entire field. I think right then and there, I actually got introduced to the idea of data, right? So that was the first time it was happening back in 2016. I'm talking about, where the consultancy that I used to work for was Indian Political Action Committee. So when I used to communicate to the audiences, it was purely based on how the audience's sentiments are, then mapped it with what the numbers have said in the past, how the patterns have been, what the audiences want, what the overall sentiment, like I mentioned. So the introduction of data happened very quickly in my career, and at the right time, so that I could understand, if you understand the data, you understand the insights, you would be able to draw better correlation with your audiences. And that's the beauty of the overall communication, or a campaign would essentially deliver the output, right? So I think my tryst with data began very early, as I mentioned. And as I progressed in my career, I think I ventured into different modules of how the data looks like. From a political standpoint, I did one element. Then from a corporate standpoint, there was another element that got added. I believe back in 2017, I was working with with a very large agency in India. Uh, and one of the clients that I was servicing, a very large, again, a very large tech um, company, they were using at a global platform a tool to monitor the conversations, to understand what's happening, whether the kind of communication or the storytelling that they're doing is actually reaching the right audiences, etc. So they were using a plethora of tools. Again, that's when I started understanding that our data needs to be inculcated in or anything and everything that a PR, or rather a communications professional, would ideally use. And of course, I worked briefly with, fortunate enough to work briefly with Vicky. And that's when I understood the next level of synthesis that needs to happen with data, right? I've understood a lot of metrics that have come into picture. And I think it's been a couple of years, the ecosystem has grown everybody now understands why we need to understand data first, because data would essentially give you the insight. So I think it's critical for everybody to not just understand what data brings to the table, but also understand how to leverage that data and the insight to essentially make sure that your audiences get that entire plate um, to the entire scheme of things, right? I think each and every campaign holds a special value purely because the effort and the time and the kind of intent goes into it. So, but if I were to just pick out of those great, great campaigns, I would pick up a few. Back in 2017 or 2018, I don't exactly remember the timeline. Uh, Again, I was working for one of the largest tech companies, and if I were to name it, it was Dell Technologies. And I was fortunate enough to be working in the same team, which kind of did one of a kind creative campaign, and which was, I can at this point in time I can easily say that it was well ahead of its time, because the way data or the way reports are right now being flashed and kind of sent to the audiences to read, it's much more technical, much more bite-sized, but the relatability concept is, I can say, it's whether it falls into a gray area, right? So, if I were to give you more specifics of it, Dell used to come up with a fantastic report, year-on-year report on, let's say, different trends in the industry, right? So, let's say something related to data protection, something related to overall digital transformation, because back in 2017, 2018, it was a larger concept that was happening. While it's still relevant, but that was possibly the key, I would say, enabler or a catalyst to the ecosystem. So everybody was curious to understand what's going to happen, right? And then what essentially we decided as a team to do was how to creatively project this. Sending a basic press note or a press release or doing interactions, etc., was great, but to strike that, I would say, the best resonance with your audiences and stakeholders to a diverse set was something missing. So we came up with a creative campaign, I would say, which was more of a mix of satire and illustration. So what we did was we kind of tweaked the insights of the report and created more like a satirical illustration and portrayed them as a calendar that's going to happen next year. So imagine you have a calendar on your desk. It says, let's say, January, and you have a very funny caricature drawn and saying that, for example, digital transformation is the next big thing. Are you and your dad ready for it? Something like that on the satire. That got great acceptance, and I would say the campaign was a win-win situation for both the brand as well as the teams that were working on it, because it got global appreciation. Of course, there were a flurry of coverage that came in, but nevertheless, that was one element. I think acceptance, appreciation that came along with that creative, and rather fulfillment that came along with the work. I think that was the high point in my career, I would say. You have to also understand, right? I think matrix, how and certain metrics are great, but I think not everything is quantifiable, to be very honest, in my opinion. Again, some things are best left to not quantify, and some things are definitely important for us to quantify. So let me give you a little broader picture of that, right? So when I mentioned acceptance, right, a particular person or a professional can ideally measure, let's say, let's take different parts of the module, right? So one part of the module can be purely based on coverage and the kind of response we got, right? If there was a number attached to it, great. Then you would know that whether you would have over-delivered or you would have under-delivered, or basically how the response have been. So that's one way to measure it, right? The other, acceptance, which is possibly unquantifiable, but it kind of is a verbal acceptance of things. So for example, if you sent all the calendars, etc., to your journalist friends and the people who are basically your brand lovers and rather evangelists, I would say, the response you receive from them kind of holds more value, as so that you understand whether this is a positive or a negative connotation of the entire perception that you were trying to draw. For our calendars back in time, we received a thunderous response from our journalist friends. They were it was because it wasn't just a campaign done to give them in-face kind of an advertising or a communication campaign, right? It was more of a way to make them understand that what the future holds like, and yes, a part of that entire future holds or rather comes from a company called Dell Technologies, and this is the report is going to be. So I would say it's a uh, how can I put it? It's an equilibrium that we need to draw between important metrics that we need to understand, whether it is share of voice, whether it is, of course, that will come to and touch upon things later, but whether it is share of voice or whether it is sentiment analysis, etc. But at the end of the day, we also need to understand how the overall acceptance in terms of verbal communications, in terms of response has been. And that, I think, in my opinion, is best left not to measure, because you don't want to just make sure that everything is quantifiable, in my opinion. Again, depends on the kind of platform that you are in. So, for example, if you're part of the agency delivering the campaign and as a rather a extended team, right? You need to make sure that whether this was just a campaign in, let's say, 10 out of 15 people or stakeholders delivered a positive response, right? So you devise different factors and metrics to make sure that you can finally package the campaign into a positive or a negative or a neutral outplay, right? So in this case, I would say if I were to pick up one or two metrics, I would say number of coverage, yes, because at the end of the day, it's a report. It needs to reach to a different level of audiences, right? And not just, let's say, someone who's reading tech. It is valid. I would say it was actually valid for multiple sectors. So we had drafted a very multi-facet or a multiple pronged strategy to reach different sectors very analytically that way. So if we were to deliver those on those parameters, I think we would count it as a win. The other aspect was, of course, the SOVs and sentiment analysis, and of course, how many headlines did we gather. So I would basically project it that if we were to get, if let's say out of 100 stories that we have got, if we were to get about 50 or 60% of the brand name in the headline, then of course it's a cherry on a top. We are living in the age, and let me give you a different perspective on what I understand how AI will impact not just communication but overall marketing and communications, right? I would rather give a larger answer than just focus on the communications bit. I personally think AI is a great teammate. It's a force to reckon with. Why? Because look at the broader aspect of it. Engineers use AI, right? Then if you were to look at interior designers are now using AI. Athletes use AI and other tools. Marketers are now sort of getting their hands dirty with AI. So why are we as PR professionals or communications or storytellers afraid of it? We can definitely benefit of it, right? AI, it's, of course, there was a negative commentary or rather a different view on that it's going to take jobs, etc. But I think it can be a great teammate, because if you're, let's say, writing and researching about a lot of industry and getting the insights to write an article or to even share a perspective of your own through any platform, I think that can be a great enabler or a catalyst to get hands onto the information that was possibly maybe not propping up in your research, right? So I think, for example, I am an avid user of ChatGPT, right? Of course, I don't rely on the product, to be very honest, but I use it as a tool that can give me insights into what, let's say, rather than spending my time 3 hours on research on just Google and other platforms, I would rather spend my 20% of time on ChatGPT to make sure that I have the relevant points and understand whether I'm missing out on something, right? So that points inculcated with my own research and my own thought process, I am able to draw out my own opinion. So I think it definitely should be a force that everyone reckons with. Rather, I would say there should be training modules for the PR professionals, because I think it's high time everybody understands. While everybody would be using it for their own advantages, but how do you use it efficiently for your work is something that everybody needs to learn. So only then you would be rather confident in using the platform rather than just getting afraid whether you're going to lose your job to it. So I think uh, whether you talk about a PR matrix or whether you talk about a platform like Viziki, for example, that delivers the entire endeavor of everybody needs to make sure that their work is done on time, efficiently, and of course there are additional metrics that can help you build on your case, whether with the internal as well as external stakeholders. I think it's high time that we invest some time and our energies into the entire sphere, and of course develop ourselves as a well-rounded professional. Everything has a pro and con, right? It depends on how you want to use it, I would say. Of course, while the application of AI in our specific sector, I would say what I've given you is all positive. I think it's going to make people lazy also. People who are essentially not 100% effort and 100% time and 100% dedication will find ways to make sure that uh, whatever they can find and get their hands, or rather their work done quickly. I think they're going to misuse it to some advantage, which is why I would again stress upon the fact that training for these set of platforms and these set of technologies for work is very critical in this hour. As communication professional, let's say if you were to just start, and if you were, let's say, take yourself and myself as an example, right? We have seen the evolution, tonal, right? And we've been possibly in the age where it's been introduced to us, and we can use it to a certain level at a personal front, so that we understand the pros and cons of it. But people who have been only using it and people who have just kind of entered the field, they've had another application of the AIs and tools, right? They would potentially be much more, I would say, hands-on with the technology than possibly that I could be. But I would say that if it's not making you lazy, if it's not making you irrelevant, if it's not making you lackadaisical in any manner, I think you should definitely make it your best friend. I think one of the dream matrix, in my opinion, can be a real-time update or rather an alert for PR and social both, right? So imagine, uh, while of course you would get an idea about whether the journalist is doing a story on you, whether you wake up in the next morning and you see a story done, or if you have a great relationship with journalists and your friends, they would be able to give you a little heads up on the story that they're kind of writing, right? But in terms of crisis, you need to have the the understanding of the situation and rather be ready for it. So imagine if there was a matrix that, or rather a platform that can help you understand what's happening, who's writing, whether positive, negative about your brand, and instantly, and this is across PR in terms of traditional storytelling and also on social. So you get a real time update on your WhatsApp or let's say the emails. You would be able to address things real time, and of course make sure it doesn't essentially lead to a crisis. So it's a dream state. I don't know whether this exists already or not, but if I could get a real time update or alert on both PR stories, etc., plus social what's happening, and the kind of social listening that I can do on social media platforms, the relevant ones, I would be excited. Of course, again, you and it's a debatable spot to be, because essentially somebody would say that the timelines of the way the people would operate in terms of working would definitely be blurred. But at the end of the day, it's an exciting thing if you're 100% dedicated to understanding what your brand needs and your audiences are thinking. And when I say audiences, it's going to be not just your journalists and the media, but also your investors, your consumers, etc., thinking about your brand. It would just give you an elevated perspective of things, and give you an added advantage as well. So the answer remains fairly similar in terms of what I want to tell these guys who are joining the profession. Show the right intent and be always hungry to learn, because see, these two parameters are going to make or break things for you. If you're showing the right intent, if you are eager, if you're curious about things, you would always make sure that you're giving 100%. You wouldn't find short term ways to make sure you accomplish the goal. While it's great in some situations, but I would say for a long term perspective, you need the right intent. Uh, I have interviewed a lot of the candidates in my course of career. I think there are great people out there. They need right mentorship also. So the third thing I would rather add is seek the right mentors. So if I were to just sum up my answer in a nutshell, I think I would say show the right intent, always be hungry to learn, always make sure that you're evolving, whether you're upskilling, whether you're relearning in a certain way. Make sure that you're always on your toes. And third, if you find the right mentors who can guide you, who can hold your hand, and who can actually make you a better professional, nothing like it.